So we have a nice small group, which gives us opportunity to keep this a little bit more informal. I'm going to, this is Service to Startup, so I'm going to talk about kind of my journey of going from the military and eventually getting out and going up into the world of startups. The bigger context here is I want to talk about, all of us going from one group, or for lack of a better term, a tribe. Like we have our culture, we have everything, our biases, our background, and going to something new. If we're in tech, it might be going in management. If we're in tech, it might be going outside of technology or something like that. So I'm going to try to bring some perspective on how, when I made that transition, there were some blind spots and how I suffered from that. There were some things that were awesome and some things that were like, ooh, I should have known better. So I'm hoping in this room, some of you guys can learn from my journey. And when you make a transition, maybe you could use a little bit of this framework and skip some of the painful steps and make a nicer leap. So to start, help me understand the audience here. Kind of raise a hands. Who like programs on a regular basis? All right. Who's in a startup right now? All right. Anybody ever in the military? Anybody like know or related people in the military? Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. So as we're going through this, I'll try to tell some stories. Try to make it interesting. Feel free to jump in, ask questions along the way, and we'll save time at the end as well. So I'm JJ Rohrer. Feel free to contact me afterwards. That was overview. This is what we're doing, my stumbles and recovery in future. So my Air Force time, I started off at the Air Force Academy, and it was in the middle of the Cold War, kind of like ominous. By the time I graduated, the Cold War had ended. So frankly, my post-Air Force Academy time was sort of boring. My interesting times were at the academy. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. That, if you go back here in the, no, you can't see that, but this is our chapel, our church. It's a multi-denominational chapel. And if you look at that, there are 17 spires on that chapel, and they say it's sort of reminiscent of airplane wings. And the question is always, why 17 spires? And someone say, well, it should be after the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Well, there's only 5 of those, or it should be after, the apostles. Well, there's only 12 apostles, but 12 apostles and 5 Joint Chiefs of Staff, that does make 17 spires. So that was always the story. I'm not sure if it's true. When I left the Air Force Academy, I did a range of things, consulting for defense contractors, worked for a family business, did iPhone stuff, went on my own for a while. So ended up going to a lot of startups, assembly, taught kids engineering, school twist, did software for PTAs that wanted to do after school classes. And right now I'm working on a company called Jutly, and we're doing AI first simulations for workplaces. Thinking about difficult conversations, thinking about how to take maybe a business framework and experiment with that, how to interact with people from a different background and bridge gaps between groups, kind of like a little bit of what we're talking about today. So that's not really important, but that's where we ended up. So Sun Tzu, military theorist, long time ago, would say, if you know your enemy, know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. So that's kind of the framework for what we're talking about here. So I'm going to kind of go through the military at the academy and sort of what I'm coming from. So please, as we're going through this, think about yourself and go, what's being trained into me right now? What's my cultural background? I see things this way. Or what's my physical background? I see things this way. Or what's my technology background? I see things this way. I approached this from a military background. I was also very into technology. Interestingly, when I was into technology at the academy, they gave me a hard time about that. And so I kind of took my technology enthusiasm and bottled that up and tried to put that away. So when I can only say this in hindsight, but the thing that I like to think about how the Air Force sort of puts everything together is in a way that contrasts is like vision, modeling good behavior, um, training, uh, self learning or retrospectives, and teamwork or camaraderie. So the vision, the short term vision coming in the Air Force Academy, straightforward. We want to graduate. Obviously, everyone wants to graduate, but like it was hard to graduate. About a third of our class would drop out before the end of the freshman year. And keep in mind, like school was free and there was stigma to dropping out, but still a third would drop out. So we wanted to like work together to get ahead. So that was the short term vision. But the big vision, what we're doing in the Air Force, was like straightforward. Fly, fight, win, and they've added on air power anytime, anywhere. So fly, fight, win, like really straightforward. Like here's what we're doing. When the time comes, that's our stuff, right? Not earth shaking, but it kind of is when you contrast it to other groups you might be with. Like, what are we here? What are we doing? Is it just to make stakeholders money or something like that? We'll talk about that one. Modeling. We also modeled professionalism from day one. So the more senior people, it wasn't just, hey, we got to fly, fight, win, but like high code of ethics. And granted, obviously, it slips, but it was really, everybody really, really tried to be professional, be ethical. And we talked a lot about the professional with a capital P of we're not just doing this for ourselves, but we're doing it for like a higher calling. It might even hurt us in the short run, but we need to be thinking about not only defending the nation, but thinking about what is the better thing for society. It might hurt us individually, but doing the right thing means kind of what you think is the right thing. Like you might have to sort of sacrifice yourself to protect the bigger group. Obviously, that could mean physically, but the bigger thing is doing it emotionally and courageously. So there's a famous case of founding the Air Force. The guy who really believed in air power kind of went against the rules and kept like doing stunts like borrowing bombers and bombing Navy ships with them, and he got like huge trouble and got kicked out, but he ended up getting a medal for it. It's like, oh, that was actually really brave what you did personally. Like you really believe in this cause, and it just kind of ruined your career, but you did the right thing. Like it demonstrated the need for an independent branch of the service. So that's the modeling aspect of it. Obviously, we did a lot of training. These are cadets. Those aren't actually real rifles, but they're just practicing crawling around and pretending they're getting shot at. Right? You know, in some ways it's not a big deal, but it's a huge deal. Having to institutionally, the Air Force would invest in practicing for later on. It wasn't just like kind of train a little bit, and actually in the history of American military, it's in our DNA that practice, practice, practice makes the difference. There's this famous, there's a number of famous things, especially in the Navy side, of the United States practicing way more than the size of our military at the time warranted, made the big difference in battles. It's one of the things that really made us world players. So, and it's really what differentiates us more than anything else from other people across the world. Obviously, we spend a lot of money in the military, pros and cons to that. But a lot of that is spent on practicing. I would take half of our military equipment, lower it, and keep practicing, and that would like really, really, really make a huge, bigger difference than the equipment. We would use pugil sticks and hit each other. Okay, that's silly. It wasn't silly. It was like important. And then this is still practicing. So these are young people, probably not going to ever have to fire a rifle. Probably not ever going to have to care about what's going on. Where is that? Japan. Probably not worrying about missile range things and where the Aegis cruisers are and stuff like that in real life. There's only a handful of people, but practicing that early on gives them a certain perspective on whatever's going to happen later on. Same thing there, practicing some flying in some operation. All right, so this is like, yeah, I'm like, yeah, of course we have to do this. And then there's the self-learning. We call it a hot wash. I think that's a reference to, when the plane is still sitting on the tarmac and still hot from flying, that you're washing the plane. We would debrief about what happened. In the game industry, we call them postmortems. A lot of people call them after-action reports. You might remember in the first Top Gun, after flying, Kelly McHottie, whatever, she's talking about how he did an inverted S, and it was like, oh, that was great, or that wasn't great, and they're showing what the planes were doing. So they weren't just flying, but they spend the money to instrument what the planes do so they could recreate everything, and then they say silly things to each other. But that's all like legit. My first time in a fighter jet was in an F4, and this is an incentive ride I got while I was at the academy, and we were a 3-ship at the end of the runway, and I forget what we were going to do. I was just excited because I was in the back, and my pilot in front of me said, "All right, if you see anything funny, say something, but otherwise should be fine." And so the 2 ships in front, they start taking off. We rev up our engines and look down, and there's like white billowing clouds or smoke or something. I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to eject. Like, is there supposed to be like smoke cloud stuff in the back? And I don't know if you guys have ever been on a plane that starts up and it's really humid. You see like the clouds coming out of the AC. It was just that, but it was coming up from it filled up the cockpit. So it wasn't that big a deal, right? But what we had to do is afterwards, like we sat down just like in the Top Gun thing, and they're like, okay, what happened? We took off, you're still on the runway, we're supposed to go off together. And they talked through, it's like, oh, he didn't know, and so we had to talk through it, and they made notes like, all right, so next time we have newbies in the back, we need to prep them on things to expect so we could all, so it won't happen again. Not a big deal, right? But that was just in their DNA. And just sort of a small side note, this guy on the F4 I was on, it was old when I was flying in it, and it was like the last ones. They put a recon pod on there, and mainly it's a big old telescope in there. And so they would fly, and there was a gimbal telescope. And so their idea is they would go out, and they thought somebody was coming. They'd send these guys out, use the telescope so they could see them from super far away without having to turn on the radar. And it was a way to be all stealthy, but you needed a fancy telescope to do it. It was super cool. Okay, then we're sort of wrapping up on the military side is the teamwork. So, this is us starting out. All these guys are the same, the yellow hats. They're all freshmen or basics, 4 degrees. These are the upperclassmen. They're going through training, marching together, right? You stick together with this same group for a long time. You're all on the same team. It's not cutthroat. Nobody gets promoted against other people. And even way down in your career, if you get promoted faster, it's like maybe just a little bit faster, maybe like 1 year ahead of it. Your pay is going to be the same. It's just not a big deal. And then, the goal is to graduate together at the end. And so that worked out well. And that followed on to the Air Force of thinking about how you're on the same team. So that's my perspective. That's what I'm starting off with. Now, if you continue, let's talk about sort of the startup world. So, typical startup, this is the Microsoft jokers. And these are the guys that they started off. Only a couple of them stuck around. But let's kind of talk about the same stuff. So the vision. All right, this is the company's vision. Anybody guess who that is? That is...
I feel like that could be a lot of companies.
Yeah. That's Facebook's. That is
Google.
Yep, yep. Provide world information in one click. This could be, I hate this one. Vision to help people and businesses throughout the world realize their full potential.
Is that
could be,
WeWork?
that could be like a Pilates studio. That could be a consulting firm. That could be a software firm. That's Microsoft. Now, this is ensure AGI or benefits all humanity.
OpenAI.
Yeah, that's OpenAI. But if I am, an employee there, how do I know when I'm not seeing, like, we wanted graduation and we knew in the Air Force it was fly, fight, win, get the planes everywhere that they need to be. This is kind of vague, and I don't know, like, when I've won that. And, those vision statements are awesome, but we also know all the stories about it being more about shareholder value. So that's just kind of a start. Like, why are people there? We all knew why we were in the Air Force on the bigger picture, a lot of personal reasons. But why do people show up at a company? Well, to make money, a lot of funny reasons. Modeling stuff, I've really seen the professionalism. It's just not institutionalized. That professionalism with a capital P, that bit me in the butt a lot of times. As we know with training, you have to figure out for yourself how to advance your technical skills. It is super rare for a company, especially a startup, to pay for you to learn new skills. Super hard, right? Self-learning, it's not institutionalized. Hot washes, after-action reports, postmortems. I wouldn't say it's not done, but I have led these at many, many companies. I have never been in a company where somebody else initiated a reflection on what just happened. I've never seen it happen. Yes, I'm sure it does. I know it does.
Yeah, we do those weekly.
Awesome.
Every time there's a problem.
So that is awesome for your company. Sad on the state of, I think, our industry that it isn't just.
I mean,
a
RCA's,
norm.
I thought were common.
Pardon me?
I thought RCA's root cause analysis meetings like this were relatively common.
Well,
It depends, right? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say I've been in plenty of root cause analysis meetings where they did it for the name, but not for the substance. So,
it's funny that I mentioned. I was a contractor at a local, at a university that, of course, you've heard of, and we did root cause analysis all the time, and they were exercises in keeping quiet. And it was actually on the team aspect of it. One of the things in the Air Force that was awesome is, like, we knew we were on the same team. We knew that we're working together right now, and we might cross paths down the road. And so everybody was earnest about trying. One of the things you never had to worry about is getting fired. You didn't have to worry about being a good follower, and they actually taught us, like, how do you be a good follower? You want to be a good leader, everybody talks about that, but how do you be a good follower? And we would talk about it and say, all right, hey, as a leader, as an officer, you have to make some key decisions. To be a good officer, a good leader in this situation, you take your best people and you say, here's, your job is to figure out what the decision to be made is, and you get inputs. You get inputs from you and you and you. And your job as a follower is to give me the best advice and the best data you can. And your job is best advice and data. They might be conflicting. And, your job, best data, might be conflicting. My job as the officers here is, like, bring that in. I got to, make a final decision. Now, the three of you is like, all right, I gave my inputs. Now I got to get behind it because, we're all kind of doing our job. OMG, that doesn't necessarily carry over to a lot of companies. It should, but like in the root cause analysis, like I got in like really big trouble. Like it has hurt my career more than once for standing up and saying, all right, to do the root cause analysis actually, let's talk about this. What's going on here, here, and here? The problems were pretty obvious and people didn't want to hear them. Like super didn't want to hear them. And that is, talk about it in a second, but that's a thing that's really different. In the Air Force, you would never get in trouble for making it heard and advocating, as long as you followed it later on. In the civilian world, you super could get in trouble for that. My wins in all this, oh yeah, team shareholder value, worst team ever. My wins in all this, doing leadership and professionalism, bringing that to the table, that's always served me well. I've always been very technical. I like programming to today, and also very strategic. That has served me well. And kind of in the Air Force, they would teach you a lot of skills, and so I show up with a pride in being able to do many, many different types of tasks with many disciplines. But doing it all myself has hurt me quite a bit. Up to a point, or I say doing it all myself is great up to a point, and then you can't do it yourself anymore. So I had a startup where I was like an indie programmer, and like, yep, I could do the marketing, not a problem. I could do the sales, I could do the programming, awesome. And it was kind of working. Because of what I was doing, I found myself in positions like, okay, now I got a problem. I can't sell fast enough. I could bring people on. I can't program fast enough. And I've been doing it myself. Like, this code base isn't like awesome to work with. Like, I need to pay somebody market rate to work on this code because it's kind of like is grunt work at this point. It's not exciting to work on. And so it just is like, you have to know, well, that hurt me. That hurt me, right? I've been too good of a follower. We talked about that before. That goes right hand in hand with being in denial about it not necessarily being a team. And then kind of sideways is mapping my own career. In the Air Force, that's kind of straightforward, although a little bit of a challenge on how to map your career. Earlier in my career, I didn't know what to do. Now I'm like very adamant. It's like, hey, a big part of my job is to map my career because there isn't anybody else out there to map it for me. And so I now am very mindful about how to facilitate that. So these observations, I like to do it. I like to have this broad set of skills. For me, that's meant, okay, figure out how to make startups work, like really early stage startups. The leadership, again, that kind of gets back to building a team. But this has meant for me, this has meant startups. This has meant not big organizations. So I don't love building teams. But I sort of have to. Not being part of being in a place where they don't necessarily say, hey, we're a team. That just, for me, says I'm going to build a place. I do build places where we are part of the team, even when it's kind of rough on some people. On the career side, and if anyone has questions, oh my gosh, for me, it's been getting. I've had career coaches. I now work with the entrepreneurial coach. Best thing I ever did for my career, and aggressively inform my career. So I am like super conscious of how do I get myself around people that could either mentor me from a career perspective or just have conversations about what I need to do. Like, the internet is freaking terrible for stuff like that. It's real people that I kind of need to talk to. But talking to those people doesn't happen by accident. I have to be very meticulous. On the personal side, I was thinking about helping others now. So I go on my way to do that. This is a first team that I help make real, and just a shift from the Air Force. They were kind of firm but fair. I'm kind of more tough-minded, tender-hearted on feedback, and being more accepting of everybody's different journeys. And lastly, don't forget your roots. For me, I found being in the Air Force, I liked that vision. I liked being part of the bigger cause. And being outside of it was this gap. I am now very conscious of how do I be part of a bigger cause. You need to show up with capacity and capability, and so I'm working on that. But I know what I want to do when I'm not part of my career is how do I defend democracy? And that, as they like to say, democracy is like, doesn't defend itself. And I would say everybody in this room, and I will say this from a perspective of don't think voting the right way is good enough. This is the year to have a plan. be asking yourself, what is my plan to defend democracy? It's like the easiest, cheapest thing you could do. But doing nothing, you will always regret that. Lastly, this is my team at Jetly, and it's a small group of awesome people that we're building up. And that's kind of it. And later on, if we have time, I'll tell you about the pool story. But that is this journey. So be thinking about, I would encourage you to think about where you're coming from. What biases do you have? What are your blind spots? The sooner you could say, all right, this is me, this group I'm going into when you're changing groups, what are they going to expect? Or what do I think I know about them? Or I'm just starting there. What am I observing? What isn't? Where are we not on the same page? Try to enumerate them. Try to not be in denial about them. If you can see those spots, I have found it not easy, but doable to adjust for those differences. Doable to just make up or pivot for the gaps, and everything's good. But if you're in denial about it, oh my gosh, that is like something you get pummeled with year after year after year. So with that, any questions or comments or discussion?
So you mentioned that you were too good of a follower. What does being a too good follower mean?
Did I? What? Yeah, I probably skipped over explaining that on purpose. So we talked about, hey, that officer has to make a decision, and you're sort of trusting that they are making a good decision in the best interest. And in the Air Force, like, you're kind of committed, right? And there's people up and down this chain really, really trying hard to do the right thing. Outside, that is not necessarily the case. I found for myself more than once going, well, this is, trying to think of a concrete example. Well, there's been more than one business where I'd find myself in a position going, I don't think this is going to work. And the boss man would say, yep, it's going to work, JJ, just do it. And so I would, obviously, you're getting paid, so you do that. But I would find myself in a trap of saying, this is my future now. What I need to do is work harder. I need to double down. That's what's going to solve this problem. That's probably not what's going to solve that problem. It took me a long time to realize, sometimes I'm just going to find myself in a situation where it doesn't matter how hard we all work, we have the wrong strategy. Or we're in a startup where people just aren't going to buy what you're building, and working harder isn't, all that's going to do is make the days go by faster. It doesn't actually get you more clients. It doesn't get you to where you need to go. So when you're below and your boss does something bad, you don't need to double down and support them. It's okay to call it like you see it and start looking for that other job or something like that. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much. Well, if anybody's sticking around, do you want to hear the pool story at the academy?
Yes.
So I couldn't fit this in to what I was trying to say. My favorite story, I think it's true. So if you guys have ever seen, this is a high dive platform in the pool, and when divers dive off, they will spray, it's not shown here, but they'll spray water out. It makes a little foamy stuff. That way when you dive off, you could judge what the surface is. Because like this, when there's no spray, you kind of see through it. When you look down, you're looking at the bottom of the pool. So at the academy, at the end of your freshman year, you would get teamed up with an upperclassman in a thing they called Hell Week. And they would come up with all these kind of crazy things for you to do. It's very one-on-one. It's very personalized. But they're crazy, right? Well, there was a freshman that paired up with a high diver, and so the high diver he would jump off the platform all the time, right? And well, what they did is they snuck out at night, see up there, there's a maintenance hatch at the top. And so they snuck out, and as part of a required class, everybody jumps off the high dive, and it's like practicing jumping from an airplane in the water, and you're pretending it's on fire and all this crazy stuff. Anyway, they climbed up maintenance, went onto the scaffolding above, and got to this access hatch. It's at night, so it's dark, right? But not pitch dark, but it's dark. You open the hatch, they're in the proper outfit to jump down, shoes and stuff like that. And of course, it's dark, super, super smooth. And they're talking about, it's like, all right, so we're going to jump. You're going to jump first. You're going to swim away, jumping after you. You can see the bottom of the pool. I'm going to drop this penny. When it hits the bottom, you'll see where the water level is. As soon as it's out of the way, you go. On it? Okay. So they're there. They drop the penny. Ding. They hear it ding, bounce. Like what? They had drained the pool that day. And it bounced off the bottom of the pool. If they hadn't dropped the penny, they both would have jumped. They would have jumped without water.
Well, nice meeting everyone.
That would have been a lesson.
That would have been a very bad lesson. They would have tied off the stairs. All right. Anyway, that's my favorite story. It scares me. I don't know. Thanks.
Could be,
Well, thanks for the questions. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.